So, good afternoon oder guten Nachmittag. Wenn ich mein Englisch nicht verstehen können, ich kann auch Deutsch sprechen für die Deutsche Sprache. Yeah. Okay, so today I will try to talk about what will come to the next PHP version, which will begin in the next couple of weeks, and to show a couple of cool new features and what's going on inside the Php.net project. The first part will be an introduction about how you can contribute or how you can help the PHP project. I try to do that on every talk I give to show how easy it is now to contribute to PHP documentation or source code or patches or tests and so on. So, my name is Pierre Joye. I work with Microsoft and port PHP and the PHP environment on every single platform. That means not only Windows, we work now with Unix systems because the Azure platform works now with Linux, BSD, and so on. So I try to make PHP as portable as possible so it behaves the same on every single platform. You can always contact me on Twitter. I'm usually faster than with email. If you have any question about PHP or something around PHP, you can always ping me. There is no issue with that. So I think you all use PHP, or do we have a non-PHP user in the room? OK. May I ask which version you use? PHP 4, 5, 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, OK, 5.3? That's better. 5.5, 5.4. OK, I would suggest to attend as well Ilya tomorrow afternoon. He has a talk about PHP 5.4 and all the new features and our compatibilities with 5.3. For the record, for example, is almost 50% faster than 5.3 and at no cost. That means you can just run the 5.3 code on 5.4 problemless and you get 50% faster. But Ilya will tell you that tomorrow, I think. That's the guide in front of me here. And has somebody already contributed to PHP? Or Php.net project? So you will need what I will say in the next 2-3 minutes. So for a short record about what was bad in PHP in the last decade, it's very well known that we had a very slow release cycle. We never know when will come a new release or when will come a bug fix, security, or whatever else. That means PHP got a reputation on being unsecure. It was hard or impossible to contribute because we had some dictatorship issues or people with DICOP, I don't remember me included. So, and a very close community. It was not actually totally true, but part of it was reflecting the facts. The good thing is, a couple of years ago, we first installed a wiki on Php.net, and we introduced what we call an RFC process. This means we have now a fixed release cycle. It means that every year we try to release a major version. That means last year or this year we released 5.4. Now we are going to begin with 5.5, which will be released in June or May or June next year. And 5.6 or 6.0 or whatever will be the next one will be released on 2014. And that means every time you do a contribution, a new feature, for example, you can be sure that within 1 year, it will be in a PHP release, if there is no backward compatibility issue. The second thing we introduce is not only the core developers are able to decide which features will be included in PHP, but the communities are allowed to vote as well. When I say communities, is because the PHP ecosystem is very large. If you take a look at Drupal, Symfony, WordPress, and so on, each of them is like, on every single conferences, like 2,000 people attending it. There are thousands of developers working with Drupal or working with Symfony or WordPress. And we have now representatives from almost every major project deciding which features can be done or to vote on a feature and so on. I will show you after in the wiki some existing RFC and who voted on it and so on. And that means if something is accepted, within 1 year, you will get the feature in a PHP release. So about the release process, what we change as well is we do, if you can see, for example, with 5.4, which was released in May, we are already in with 5.4.7, and we are working now on 5.4.8. And we are only like 5 months away from the first version of 5.4.0. And because we did like 3 security-only releases, that means where we found a security fix, we directly made a release within 2 weeks. We made every 1 to 2 months, we make a release as well. That means bug fixes get into a release very quickly. And the yearly release that I was talking about previously. On security is also a huge improvement. That means before we were only a couple of core developers on the security mailing list. And now we invited almost all major distributions. There is also people from security companies involved in the security mailing list. They review the patches, discover new issues, and so on. So that's something that makes PHP much, much secure than it ever was before. And what, at least for me, and I know for Ilya as well, the best thing I think happened in the last year in PHP is, this is a list from January to beginning of June of this year, the top contributors to PHP. That means out of 5, 2 of them are some old guys where we are totally irrelevant at this point, and all others are new people. 2 of them have written something like 30% or 70% of the new features we will have in 5.5. And that's the thing for us. It's what we are trying to achieve is to get new contributors making PHP better. Not like we did before, where it was always the same people developing new features. This is people, they have written almost everything you will have in 5.5 or what I will show what I will show today. The first one is a Chinese guy. He's working for now for his own company. He was working before for the Yahoo equivalent in China. I don't remember the name, Bahoo or something like that. The second one is a student university, and the third one is working with my team within Microsoft. So that is doing a lot of bug fixing and new features. By the way, that makes now we have top contributors in the Linux kernel and PHP are people from Microsoft as well. So we are getting a little bit, the Microsoft is getting a little bit more open than before. That's the good news for my part. So the conclusion is, I mean, if you have excuses before now, I don't think you have much excuses left to do not contribute to PHP in one way or in another. The easiest way is, who heard about that before on this URL? Nobody? OK. This is, I will just show you a demo now. And then I will move to the more interesting part, no worry. If I have a net access, yes. Just to show you, this is a login form. I will just go back here because I have difficulties to write from the text here. I will use my CVN, my PHP account, but you can log in using Gmail or OAuth or Facebook. OK, so now I can simply open the documentation. That's what you are seeing online. When you go on the PHP documentation, that's what you have here. And for example, I will take, for one that everyone should know, the configuration part of, did I click it? Yep. Of the FPM, FastAGI FPM. But my network connection is a bit slow, so I will seek back. The network connection is too slow here. So what you see is you will see an editor like that, and you can directly edit the documentation. If you find, for example, a mistake in the documentation or something, information is missing, or a function is not documented, but you are using it already and you know how to document it, you can directly document it here. It will be saved. Someone will review it very quickly, and it will be published within a couple of hours directly online. So that's one of the most easiest way to contribute directly to the PHP project. The other part is, who use Git, by the way? OK. Other people should consider to use Git, by the way. It's very much better than anything else, right? And thanks to David, we move as well the whole PHP project to Git, and we have a mirror on GitHub. That means nobody uses GitHub here except you two, I think. Oh. So that means you use Git as well. OK. Because by Git, I mean the tool Git. So GitHub is. That means it's very easy to. You see here that you can show the source. That's a toolbar on GitHub. And this is a pull request. So what is a pull request on GitHub is you do what we called in Git a clone of the PHP source code. You make your modification. And then you go on the Git frontend, on the web frontend, you just say, do a pull request. And we will get directly a patch from what we have done. And we can merge it within seconds. That means before you had to do a patch, log into the bug system in PHP.NET, upload the patch, we have to review it, and so on. And now we can have directly a pull request. The pull request will be run through our continuous integration system. If the test pass, we can commit it directly. That means if you find a typo, for example, in an error message, or if you have a quick fix for a bug you have found, you can do it within 5 minutes. A pull request, someone will review it. Most men, for example, Ilya or I or other people, can review it and commit it directly. So any questions so far? Or I think that was the easy part. So now, the more interesting part about PHP 5.5. That will be the next PHP version. We already have many features which are already accepted. In the next couple of days or weeks, we will have votes on other 3 or 4 new features, which are not sure if we will get them in 5.5 or not. So if you are interested, you can subscribe to the internal mailing list and to follow the discussion and to give feedback or comments about how you would like to have one feature or another. That's right now, it's the right time to discuss such things for the next release. All the source code I use here, you can show them on GitHub. So the first thing is, who has used that already before and wanted to use a list keyword inside a foreach and never worked before? Nobody? OK, so if you have used this, try to do that before. It was simply not possible. So that's a little bit a shortcut, and it's a slightly faster as well. It's a micro-optimization. It's a little bit faster now. So that's one of the small feature sets we are getting in 5.5. The next one, which was much more annoying, at least for me, is you can finally test emptiness of expressions. That means before you cannot do that. As soon as you have an expression like A plus B and so on, it was not possible to test if the result is empty or not. Now it works. Isset is still not accepting any kind of expression because isset only a variable can be set and not an expression. So the next one is we have the honor to get another array function. And instead of doing that, you can simply call one column, array column. It's a little bit like syntax sugar, but it could be handy, and it's also slightly faster. Ben wrote that, Ben Ramsey. But you missed the thread, I think, on internal. This one is much more useful. It's a PKDF2 hashing method. It's very useful for password hashing. Have you heard about it or never before? It's one of the latest hashing methods for passwords and so on. It's already implemented in OpenSSL, for example. It's one of the so-called most secure algorithm right now, and for the next couple of weeks at least. So you can find all the description how it is implemented in this IFC here. And the function is already committed in PHP. That means if you use a snapshot from the master or trunk, as it was called before, you can already test it. It's part of, it will be enabled by default because it is part of the hash extension. Who uses the hash extension now? Nobody? The hash extension is very useful because you don't have any dependency. It's always enabled by default. And you have almost all hashing algorithms you need. So if you need that at one point or another, try to take a look at that. It's very, very handy. And something related is we finally have a simple password API. That means every single PHP project I know implements that themselves. WordPress, Drupal, Typo3, Symfony, and so on are trying to implement then their own password implementation has been own password, own API, and so on. So it's very difficult to make, for example, if you have a heterogeneous project and you try to use Drupal with your own project, you always have to write plugins for the authentication or to use the same password. So the full documentation can be seen here. I can show you so you see it. This is, by the way, because there are a lot more IFC being discussed right now. This is a list of the IFC we are working on or that have been discussed. So if you're interested to see what's going on in PHP or what is being developed, you can always take a look here. Now we'll just look for the password one. Yes, this one is listed on an accepted one. And as you can see, the biggest difference between before and now, before when we got a new feature, we just got a line in the news file saying you have these 3 new functions. Now when you got something new, even if it's not documented, if you go on the wiki looking at the IFC, you have the full specification, documentation, the patch, the limitation, and so on. So you can already using it totally in your application as soon as it's already committed in PHP. For some people, it should be even very easy to make an extension out of it because the code is already on Git. So you can merge and do a backport, for example, if you need that in 5.4 or another version. So. And this is how it works. So the first one is the classic, if you have used crypt. Do you know the crypt function? Who does not? Just for the record. OK. So instead of using the crypt function with this horrible prefix you have to remember with $6A or $1A for MD5 or to Blowfish and so on, you can specify which kind of algorithms you like to use. And we introduced as well, in the latest version of the patch, for this constant, you can say, I don't want to use a specific algorithm. I want to use the most secure one, and we call it default. That means if, for example, we do 550, it will be Blowfish, for example. And if we, in 553, there is a new algorithm, which is more secure, the default will be changed. That means you don't have to worry about anymore to know which one is the most secure hashing implementation. So this is for the hashing part, and this is the part you will use, for example, to check a password. So it's much more easier to do than what we had before using crypt. And the question, the problem we had was as well is, OK, but if I want to unify my password, I have to rehash old passwords using the new algorithm. So you can use that using this info here. And then you can simply check if you need to rehash the function or not, rehash the password or not. So this is not, these new functions are not yet in PHP committed, but they will be in the next days. I just asked the developer before to commit it to the trunk, because the RFC is already accepted and will be part of PHP 5.5, and there will be certainly a picket extension as well for it. That means even if you use 5.3, 5.4, or maybe 5.2, I'm not sure if he will do it, you will be able to use these functions. For what we heard, Symfony, Drupal are already planning to use these APIs as well, instead of what they've written before. Any questions so far? No. Something which is hardly discussed right now. It's a new kind of getter and setter. Who uses these two magic methods already? Who likes them? Ilya, can you turn around, please? Please stand up and walk the room, please. There is no hand up. So we are the same. I have exactly the same opinion. It's a pain in the ass to use this getter and setter because you have to do the switch case or if, and at the end of the day, all I do is get value, or set value instead of using that. So I use a lot C# or C++ before. I try to avoid C++ now because for all the reasons. But and someone implemented the C# version of get and set. Who uses C#? Do you use that as well in C# or not too much? Yeah. And that follows exactly the same principles. So the idea is, by the way, this is where the wiki, the IFC is described with all the limitations. And for those using Windows, I just built this morning a snapshot of this source code of the fork, so you can test it on Windows as well. And the final version of this IFC is not yet defined because we are still discussing it. That means if you're interested in this feature, subscribe to internals and give your feedback. Because it's the right time now to influence how it will work or how exactly it will work. It's especially useful if you use an ORM like Doctrine or Propel and stuff like that. Or for reporting as well, it's very useful if you do, because you never know which kind of property you have. Sometimes you have to implement business logic inside a property and so on. And I will show you how useful it could be. So this is, for example, a default way to do it. You simply set a default getter and setter that will work exactly like a normal property. Because internally what it does is they are not internal properties like what you have in PHP. In PHP you have a class, and each instance of a class has an hash table storing the properties. So just like variables. Is it big enough, or you can read it? Okay. And what it does is it defines, it's a kind of interface, because you can override the getter and setters, and the values are stored in extra storage. They are not actually properties. But this is a more simple way to have something like a normal property. You don't have to do it. That means what you had before, like just using public seconds and a colon, will simply work just like before as a normal property. That won't use the new getters and setters. A more complex example. More complex. Now let's say you have to implement some kind of logic. So instead of having a hot switch case and, if it's an hour, I have to do that, or calling another method, you can just implement what you have to do here. And if you don't want to implement a special setter, you don't do it. Who likes this syntax? OK. Ilya, can you turn around? I'm trying to convince him as well, by the way, if you did not notice. So, and as you see here, it just works the same way. I will just make a little demo. I just make a web browser. OK, and what I want is, what was the name of the script? Props 2. Here. So that's simply the script called here using the bundle web server. I just call php.exe. I say the IP, host port, and the document root, and then I simply give the URL. It works with image as well and static files. So the result of here, you can see, hopla. I return 45 always, so I will get my hours as 45, obviously. Okay. So another one is, does it work with static properties as well? Yes. So here I have a static property. You see the declaration is exactly the same as before, and you can implement your own static property here. So I have two examples in one here, maybe a little bit a big jump, but first you have static property, and you have an extended class extending the classic property as well, and it shows you how it works and that the second property can be set directly as well. I mean, if you had defined this property from this class, this method will be called and not the other one. I will show you shortly the demo. Do I have my editor? No. If you see my mouse cursor, please tell me here. So the code I'm running, I just make it shorter for the demo, this part here. So the second part, I'm setting the property to another value as a parent class. Hang on. The parent class was set to 5. And for the child class, I set it to 45. So the browser is here. And the name was okay. As you can see, the first part was from the parent class, where static property was set to 5. The second part, I set the area to 25, and I simply display the output to 25. So it works the same way for static properties or normal properties and so on. Because it was almost very hard or almost impossible to do before with underscore get and set, or very difficult because you have to manage all the parent class properties, and it was very, very difficult. And a source of many, many bugs in many applications. So you can see all the source code, for example. There are like 100 of tests inside the IFC. The documentation for the IFC, for the getter setters, is also very, very well documented. It is actualized. The authors update it almost daily now because we have very heavy discussions about every detail, implementation details, because it's not a simple task. It's not something that you have like 2-3 possibilities to do it. So if you use that, or if you have usage for that in your application and so on, I can only recommend subscribes to internals, only to read the discussions. And if you have an idea or maybe an opinion or maybe a use case to say, okay, this is how we do it, then do it. Because for the core developers, the problem we have is we do what we do because we need it. But we have no fucking clue about what you need. So the only way for us to know that you do that in your applications or for reporting systems or whatever else is to simply send us feedback, and that's why we have introduced that. And we repeat that again and again, by the way. So, for example, here you see we use a public keyword, and there is one with, hopla. By the way, I didn't talk about it, but type hinting is working as well for properties. And this is one of the top new change we made in that, because before it was very difficult to implement type hinting for properties. Now you can do it just like a normal method. And for the read-only, I have to find where is it faster. Okay, this one. For example, here, we only define a set, which we make it, for example, only white only, if you need it, for example, internally. And we introduced, but I don't think he updated the IFC, you have now a keyword as well, which is called read only. So you can define a property as read only as well. I think I saw it before this morning. Let me search for only, could be faster. Bad idea. And that's not Internet Explorer, by the way. I will take back the phone because it will be faster. No, I didn't make an example, but I have an example, for example, which represents the same ID. No. Here, where you can have totally different policy for one method or the other. For example, this one means you won't be able to extend it anyway. So it has to respect the same interface, and it will be always called from the parent class. I don't know if many of you have used final before in PHP as well. I mean, 5.3 and up. I think you may not at all. Okay, so that's a kind of new feature you can use because you can see that like every normal method. So everything that applies to all the methods can be used for this property setter and getter and setter is set. The next one is something who was inspired from Python. Who used Python? Or knows Python a little bit? Okay. So the latest version, I think, it began in 2.5, the test version. It was a new keyword called yield. The idea is to have an easy way to implement generators without having to implement the whole interface of generators, of iterators. Who has used already some kind of iterators, like Away iterator or the SPL interface and so on? I think. Okay, so it could be very painful sometimes when we need a simple iterator, and you have to implement like 5, 6 methods, and it could be very complex. So the idea here is, who can tell what this small function will do? So, and you can use it with foreach, you can use it with a for, you can use it as an index, because since PHP 5.4, you can, for example, have a function call and directly dereference an array, because before it was not possible. Do you know what I mean when I say to dereference an array? You have a function call and you want, for example, the third element of the array, you can directly do that using the function call. You don't have to use a temporary variable anymore. So, for example, using this function, we could do, for example, generator simple one. You can return yield away something, and you can do that as well. That's the most simple example, and now a more confusing, but just to show the possibilities. This is something where you can generate simple values. You can generate an array element. You can generate key as number or string, just like a normal array. And it works exactly the same way. So, and it works, except for one or two small things, it works exactly the same way that it is in Python. And there is also a patch for Ruby to do something similar, but now in Python it's in 2.6, relatively stable. So if you use both, you won't be confused between one implementation or the other. And another example is like the classic receiver. When you, for example, you fetch query from something and you don't know when you are done, you can simply stop at the end or change the value. And here you always get the latest value. That means it will generate always a new one. If it's unset, that means the first value will be set to 1, because 0 plus 1, and so on. And an example which is like inside a method, that's exactly the same way. It works as well with variables. That means you can, for reporting tools or statistics or whatever, you can, for example, fetch the data you want from a record set and return it directly using yield, for example. You don't have to define the yield value statically. And this is something much, if you have worked before with iterators, it's something much, much simpler to implement now. Any question until now? Okay. A last example. That's something, that's a comparison, but if you accept the people having used Python with generators, that's the only difference, little difference between the Python implementation and PHP implementation is when you call the current, that resumes the generators and then start again, which is not the case directly in Python. But if you never use the generators before, you won't notice it anyway. So, but I put that always here because I got a lot of questions from people coming from Python and having that kind of issues. Okay, so another cool thing, but this is not new to PHP 5.5, but there are new features in this extension. Who uses or knows INTL? Okay, if you have to remember one thing today is use INTL. Already in 5.3, already in 5.4. What is INTL is a full Unicode implementation. It used ICU. ICU was initially an IBM project to implement the full Unicode data and features inside the library. There is a Java implementation, .NET, a C implementation, and PHP is based on the C implementation. What I mean with Unicode, it's not only about I want to output UTF-16 or UTF-8. It's also about number formats, date formatting in every single language supported by Unicode. That means if you have worked with local numbers, local dates, and so on, you know how painful it could be. And this is something, even if you use the same API, let's say you are using now 5.3.7, and you have a Unicode bug because the data is not up to date. Your system library like Debian or whatever else, or on Windows, it's done almost on every Windows release. The ICU library will be updated, and you will get the bug fix you need for the languages you are using, for example. And you don't have to change anything in your code. And it works with 200 languages. It supports almost any encoding, plus any kind of Unicode data. It supports numbers format. Now it has for date, time, and many other things like chapter numbers or whatever else. And this is something very easy to use. And it will work from now, from 5.3 until PHP 7 or whatever else, because we won't change these APIs tomorrow. And the data of the Unicode will change. That means when we began to work on INTL, we were using ICU 3.0, and now it's something like 6, and they are working on the version 7. But the same code will work with the latest Unicode data and API without any change, the same PHP code, And this is the new interfaces which will be included in PHP 5.5, something to manage, to work with calendars. That means working with January, February, or other calendars, or Gregorian calendar as well. Time zones. The date extension, for example, is very good, but when we have to deal with local data or local information, there is not enough information or no translation. It's only what you available on your local system. Unix side, not Unicode. So using this class, you can do the conversion for your front end very, very easily. The break iterators, if you need to split text, for example, using words and so on, no matter the language. If you have tried, for example, to split a text in Chinese or in Russian when you don't speak Russian, it's not necessarily very easy. This is something supported by the INTL extension very easily. So if you write your You write your application, for example, using French, German, or English, but the API will work just as fine if the users are giving Russian text, for example. And nobody has really never used INTL before. Ilya, we have to do something better here from a documentation, because it is available by default since PHP 5.3.0. You can fetch it as well for PHP 5.2 using Pickle, if you are still using PHP 5.2. And this is only 6 new ones. Since I wrote these slides 2 weeks ago, there are 3 new ones, and there are already like 12 or 15 already available since 5.3. In PHP, there is a policy is extension can be enabled by default only if they don't have a dependency, a system dependency. And the INTL extensions relies on the ICU library. That's why we don't enable it by default. But every single distribution has ICU and has PHP INTL as an extension. If you do apt-get install PHP 5 minus INTL, you get it. Or PHP minus INTL now, because I think almost all distributions kill PHP 4 now. And for PHP 5.2, for those few users, you can still, we don't maintain it anymore. That means there is no new release, but you can still use the initial set of interfaces using PHP 5.2. And every time the ICU project implements new interfaces, it's directly implemented in PHP as well. That means it's possible that every new year you get new interfaces to work with new set of formatting rules. Because you have also, unlike local get, the local interface that we have before using this horrible syntax where you have to do everything manually. Here you have something, I call it like a printf on steroids. Because what you can do here is you can format text using placeholders, no matter the language. With complex syntax, you can make conditions where plural forms and so on. And this is, I was waiting for that since I use PHP. And I think now in Europe, I mean, if you are working in Europe or doing websites for European countries, you have to deal minimum with 3 languages already, with then own formatting rules and so on. And it's always painful to keep up with everything because some countries are very good to change the rules, official rules, every second year. So it's good to keep up automatically without having to change the code. Because if you define, for example, a code for a country, the Unicode data will get updated automatically. You don't have to define the format yourself afterwards. Who used namespaces already? OK, who has problem with that? I'm happy that you use at least one feature of PHP 5.3. Did you meet this issue already? The fully Californian, OK. That's something, it was a bit painful to make if you have to figure out where you are inside the namespace using reflection. And this will be fixed in PHP 5.5. At the small cases, if you write a lot of web services when you define the API using reflection, this problem has been very, very painful because you cannot define really where you are inside a namespace directly. So you you could not define call foobar using reflection. You have to pass the full class name, and sometimes it's not possible because you do something dynamically. That means you give a variable containing the name of a class, but you have to resolve it within the active namespace. And so that could be sometimes very tricky. But now it's possible to do it using a constant with the same name as the class. I mean, if once you have a bug when you see a class which is not visible and should be visible, it's most likely due to that. One thing that should be as well possible in 5.5, but I don't remember now. I tried to figure out in the mailing list if it was accepted or not. The classical problem when you have a function with optional parameters, and let's say you want to set a value here or this one, but you don't want to change the other default values. The problem is, how will you do that now, for example? That means you have to know which value was set, you have to check the documentation and so on. And the solution we have discussed was to do this way. Instead of having to figure out which values were there, say, okay, I don't care, default. And there was a discussion, the idea was, if we do that in 2 steps, that means one step will be use this solution, which is, to me, very obvious, works with the old syntax, default for what I know, and it's also already a keyword in PHP, so there is no BC break, and it's very easy. The second solution we are working on, but I'm not sure we will do it timely for PHP 5.5, is to use named parameters. That means, what are named parameters? That means instead of using only a variable, we say that this parameter, the name is where. So when you do the function call, you say where equal deleted equals 0, for example. So you just give the name of the parameter you like to set. Something, yes, other languages have that since very, very long. For example, I don't work with Apple, so and I hate Objective-C, to be honest. It's the most crappy language I've ever had. But that's another topic. But that's something very handy. The question, and because now what we have seen in many libraries, many people, instead of using parameters, they are using an array with 10 elements, and you have to set the keys and so on, and they do an array merge, and it's very slow. And it's almost impossible to document clearly because you have to read everything, which parameters, and so on. So that's something that certainly will happen in 5.5, but it's, I cannot say for sure if it's already accepted or not. Any question of this part? It's pretty easy to understand, I think, on both parts. And indeed, it is more readable as well. OK, if you do a code review, you still have to read the documentation to know which default value was there, but for the developers, it's easier. And finally, we have finally. So I think you all use exceptions as well at some point, enfin, on purpose or not, but exceptions are now very widely used in PHP. And one of the top features which was back then rejected by when we implemented finally, it was when we implemented first exceptions, it was in 5.5 there was a couple one, but the 5.2 had many more. And we have very heavy discussions about implementing finally or not. It was decided that it was not a good thing. And now we have an IFC, a vote a couple of weeks ago, and it was massively accepted. So if you have some usage, I won't say use it in every single try-catch clause, but there is some situation where it makes sense to have a finally. This is something, OK. It's always nice to close the connection and so on, but that's one case where you can say, I may need a finally clause. But now it will be in 5.5. Who was looking for finally, for example, or have a need for finally? OK. But that means what I see is many people are using exception because libraries implemented exception, for example, Doctrine or Symfony and so on, but does not use exceptions themselves in their own code. So that's why it's always it's not a large, widely used feature. So thank you very much for coming. And feel free to ping me if you have questions.